In this episode, I'm talking with Kate Wallinga, a forensic psychologist. Even though we're not talking about fictional stories, I found her life story to be extremely interesting, and I hope you do too. Welcome to Story Power, a bi-monthly podcast where my guests and I geek out about the stories we're passionate about in all different genres, styles, and formats. My name is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, and I started this podcast in the summer of 2020 at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. As I watched the reaction of my friends, family, and social media circle, I noticed that many people turned to stories for comfort and help in making sense of the craziness going on around them. My goal was to do the same for my listeners, but as I chatted with my guests throughout the first year, I discovered that their personal stories were the most fascinating thing about each episode. Neil Gaiman says, "Fairy tales are more than true not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten." I now know that sharing our experiences with others helps us defeat our own dragons. It is our stories that connect us to one another. Let's see what wisdom today's guest has to share with us. So today is episode 49, and Kate Wallinga is my guest. I was on Kate's podcast, Ignorance Was Bliss, just a few days ago as we're recording. But unfortunately, Kate, your episode is not going to air until May because I have a long list of episodes that I need to edit. But I'm so happy that we get to have another conversation, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. And I mean, May is my birthday, so that just makes sense.
Oh, well, there you go. That's good. We talked a little bit on your show about the original intent of your podcast, and you are a forensic psychologist. Is that correct?
It is. Yep.
Yeah. And so your podcast was about, just tell about it. Just tell about what your podcast was about and how you changed it.
Absolutely. The beautiful thing about podcasting is that there aren't rules.
Yeah.
And you're allowed to change that. So for me, what happened is on New Year's Day of 2018, I kind of hit a wall in terms of feeling overwhelmed by many details that were going on in my life, including the fact that I have 4 children and my father had just moved in, and there was just a lot going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked up to my husband, and in some versions of the story, I gently patted him on the shoulder, and in other versions of the story, I grabbed him by the scruff of the neck. You can decide which you think is more accurate. But I said to him, I'm going to start a podcast. And because we've been married for 20 years and he's a smart man, his answer was, okay. Because I just needed something that was mine, that I wasn't going to be performing as someone's mother or someone's daughter or someone's partner. I have been on disability since 2014 because I broke my back. And so I missed feeling competent and productive and interesting, because I'll tell you what, you're around your own kids, they don't think you're interesting anymore. And so, I wanted to do something, and a hobby like podcasting requires them to leave you alone and be quiet.
Right. Yes.
So that's where it started. And I went through the concept of the name of the show is Ignorance Was Bliss. The idea that once you know something, you can't unknow it. And, what's the easiest to talk about is that which you already know. So I was going to make a sort of true crime adjacent type show that explained what forensic psychology is and the role that it plays in cases, and, just sort of talk about my professional experiences to the extent that I could. And that's what I did for a bit. And maybe 6 months in, something like that, I realized that for a couple of things. For one, the true crime community can be a pretty gatekeeping intensive sort of place.
Oh.
And so I would have other true crime podcasters tell me that my show wasn't really true crime. And that was fascinating to me because I would be like, I'm literally part of the case. Like, I don't understand how that doesn't count. Meanwhile, you've read an article on Wikipedia and you know, sure, cool. But I also realized that I wanted, well, two other things, I guess. One is that when I was doing my job, you end up in a dark place. You end up working with people who have done or said sometimes terrible, unthinkable things, or are thinking of it. And people would ask, how do you stay sane? And the answer is, well, you might not. That's an assumption. But that also, it's a privilege because these are still human beings. We are not the worst thing we've ever done. We are an accumulation of all of the things that we've done in our lives and the things we haven't done. And so a lot of the times the people that are behind prison walls are known for the worst thing they've ever done, but that doesn't mean the rest of their life just evaporates. And having the privilege and the honor to see some of the humanity that the rest of the world has either forgotten or willfully ignored was what kept me going. And it's what let me have some degree of sanity, at least. And to go along with that, when you're doing true crime as a podcast only, you lose that humanity a little bit because you're talking about the cases, but you're not interacting with the human anymore.
Oh, yeah.
So you start to go down into some dark places. And I started to have not nightmares exactly, but I would have a higher level of anxiety. And I had a difficult time feeling like I wasn't just being voyeuristic or sensationalistic. And so I decided, you know what? I know a lot of other people, other podcasters and creators and authors and actors and listeners and family members, just, humans in general. And they all have stories. And the thing that I enjoy the most is that connection. And that's what I was missing the most being home on disability was that opportunity to sit and talk to somebody and listen to their story. And so I decided, you know what? No rules in podcasting. I'm going to change my genre. I'm not going to be a true crime podcaster or true crime adjacent necessarily. I'm going to collect stories. And sometimes the stories that get collected and shared are the personal story of my guest. And sometimes it's somebody comes to me and says, hey, I want to talk about this particular case. Can we do like a case study and write up about this case or this psychological concept or topic or historical event or something like that? And, I feel like that all of that's fun. All of that's fascinating. And it gives me this flexibility to use my brain and to engage with my guests wherever they meet me at. And so the vast majority of my episodes, I start with a blank page. I start with no plans, no structure, no intention, because I find when I do that, if I have talking points, I tend to get distracted and I get too sucked into the page and I might miss the actual connection with the guest. And then other times I have full scripts. Not often, but not unusually, I'll have a full script where we have written something together, my guest and I, because we want to tell a story. And if you're telling a crime story, it's really important to be as factually accurate as possible.
Oh, wow. One of the things you said just now that I connect with is that the people who are incarcerated are not just the crime they committed, but they are human beings and they have light and dark. We all have light and dark in us. And I love that you saw that in the people that you were working with, that they were human beings, that they weren't a number or the sensational case that they were involved in or whatever. So I just love that because that's I try to do that when I meet people, is just see them as a human being. I'm not always successful, but
it's not easy. And I had a big lesson sort of in that vein given to me pretty early on when I first started that I worked I've worked in a couple of different locked psychiatric facilities, but I worked at the state prison for men in New Hampshire for a while. And when I first started at the state prison, they put you on just doing what's called an intake, which the front and back of a sheet of paper where you take down their demographics and their mental health history and treatment history, for paperwork purposes, but also to try to catch them out before they learn that they should, visual quotes, should say that they've been on Adderall since they were 3, because then they can maybe sell their drugs.
Oh, right.
Right. Things like that. And I mean, the reality is they know that already. We're not actually catching them out, but fine. You do what you can. And that's the first task they gave me, that I was allowed to sort of do all by myself. And we know that there are high rates of recidivism, of reoffense in the American criminal justice system. And so some of the people that they had me with my first week on the job were pretty high profile and had been through this revolving door several times. They knew what I was supposed to do much better than I knew what I was supposed to do. And, so it sort of helps the process. And so I'm in this disused classroom. It's basically like you would picture any sort of typical American classroom, with no desks, though, except for the one that I'm sitting at. So like the industrial teacher desk sort of thing. And I'm in a chair, and there's a plastic, like not the folding lawn chair, but a plastic lawn chair that the inmate is supposed to sit in. And that's it. That's all we got for furnishings in the room. And this guy walks in. His name was not Joe, but we'll call him Joe. And he was in his late 30s approximately, and had been in prison for something like 15 out of the last 18 years. So basically his entire adult life.
Oh, wow.
And so he knew the drill. And they sit him down and they handcuff him to this plastic lawn chair, which I'm like, cool, now you just made that into a weapon. That's fantastic. I don't feel any safer now, but whatever. And the thing about this guy, you got to picture, he's, in my mind, about 27 feet tall and approximately as wide, like just enormous, like the size of a small truck. He was just this very big human. He had to duck a little bit to come into the door, and that's intimidating for me. I was maybe 25 at the time. And so I'm thinking like, whoo, hi, okay. And we went through the process pretty straightforward. You take down their name and their, like I said, their history and their, inmate number and things like that. And we're finishing up, and it's all gone completely smoothly in 15 minutes, start to finish. We're almost done. And I said to this man, I was like, okay, I think we're good. Thank you for your time. And, Joe, it was good to meet you. Have a good day. And Joe, this enormous, chiseled mountain of a human, looked at me and burst into tears. And I panicked, because I was like, oh my God, I just broke him. I just broke this man. What did I do? What do I do now? Huh? Like, and there's no tissues in the room. There's no, what am I going to do anyway? Am I going to wipe his nose? Like, all of these thoughts in my head. And I'm like, Joe? And he's like, sorry. Sorry. I just wasn't expecting that. He says, my family has walked away from me. I haven't really had a connection on the outside in like 20 years approximately, and they don't even write to me anymore. And when you're in prison, the other inmates either refer to you by your last name or by a nickname of some sort, and the corrections officers refer to you by your number. So he's like, I haven't heard another person say thank you or call me by my first name in probably 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And I just wasn't ready for that. And so now I have to give him some time to compose himself a little bit and kind of gather himself back together, because you can't send him back out onto the rec yard when he is vulnerable and shaky and upset, because that's the equivalent of putting a kick me sign on the back of somebody, you know?
Right.
And I learned right there, like, this is how far we've come in dehumanizing these people, that they can't even hear their own first name without it being sort of a psychic shock.
Oh, wow. I think I'd be crying too.
It had, you know, I'm not a crier much myself, but it's obviously it stayed with me. It stayed with me 30 years later, you know, 20 years later, that, you know, and what I learned two things from that. I learned, for one, is that we can't take anything for granted. And for two, I learned, when I took their names down at the beginning, that I would have them spell their first and last names, and then I would ask them, what would you like me to call you? Because I wanted to show that I did respect their humanity and that I appreciated their cooperation. But you can't make someone vulnerable ethically. You can't make someone vulnerable if you can avoid it.
Right.
So like you can't be all warm and fuzzy inside a prison, because that can just create bigger problems.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So you had to walk this tightrope kind of thing.
Yeah.
That would be stressful.
It's a different world. It's a different role to play, because, you know, I was never beyond what I had to do to get my degree. I was never interested in becoming a therapist, because I'm a terrible therapist. I'm not very patient. And the thing about therapy is that you have to allow people to reach the changes they're ready to reach at their own pace.
Right.
And that's difficult. Like I can wait long enough for like a 3-year-old to learn how to tie their own shoe. Like I can be that level patient, but I can't see you 7 sessions in and have you repeat the same story with no sense of change. Like, I know I'm not what you need then. That's just, I'm not good at that. I'm not good at creating the kind of environment that will encourage you to, oh, for the love of all that is holy, stop talking about the same thing. Like, not great. You don't want to hear that from your therapist. So I've always been interested in forensic work and in assessment. And when you work inside a prison, you don't do therapy. Like, you do skills, education, you do some group work, you do check-ins and assessments, but you don't do the kind of therapy that you would do on the outside, because you can't create that vulnerability ethically. So that's a weird line to walk. I sat in sort of a unique space in the inmates worlds, because first of all, being a woman in a men's facility, I've always felt safe, and I always felt respected there, because they know, like, not only do you don't touch staff, but you definitely don't touch the female staff. Right.
Oh, yeah.
So there was that, but they knew that I wasn't administration or guards.
Right.
So I kind of sat in this weird space with them. And it was a lot of walking lines, and I'm sure I stepped on the wrong side of the tightrope every day that I was there, but you just get up and do your best the next time you get into work.
Oh, really? Wow. So have you ever thought about writing a book or anything about it?
I have. So it broke way back in 2014. In 2010, I had my third child and had complications during childbirth that landed me in a coma for a week and a half.
Oh, no.
And I don't recommend that. Not nearly as fun or sexy as I make it look, for sure. And and I sustained a traumatic brain injury from that. Your brain does not like lying still for 10 days.
Right.
Doesn't like that. And so when I came out of the coma, I struggle with words in a way that I didn't used to. It's much more difficult for me to put a sentence together. And I completely lost my ability to handwrite. I had to relearn how to physically write words.
Wow.
And the concept of putting together a book and the amount of work and focus that would take terrifies me.
Oh, I can see that. I have a friend who had brain surgery. She says that all the time. She's not exactly the same person that she was before the surgery.
I'm very different from, between that and then I think related, but several years later I developed epilepsy, and the lesion from the epilepsy, lesion being a scar on your brain, is in my right frontal lobe. I'm pointing to it like anybody can see. It's where, right over your right eye, basically, in the front of your brain. And that's where your executive functioning sits, which is your ability to come up with the plan, follow it through, and then sort of assess how it went.
Oh, yeah.
So, executive dysfunction are things like ADHD, but also schizophrenia, autism, certain forms of anxiety, all are kind of controlled and messed up when you have a problem with that part of your brain. And so that is super fun that a seizure created the lesion created ADHD for me. And I can't take medication for the ADHD because ADHD medications can cause seizures.
Oh, Jiminy Christmas.
So you sort of laugh or scream. So someday, the technology is getting better and better with transcription software and that sort of thing. Since I have my podcast, I have all of the hardware and software kind of figured out. I might someday dictate a book and then convert it to type.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Or it could just be a series of little essays, which might be easier for you.
I think we've established that I don't tell short stories.
Wow, that's a fascinating story about your first experience and then what you learned from that, and then trying to balance treating the guys like they're human beings but not making them feel vulnerable emotionally. Yeah, since you've been home and on disability, do you ever have any other situations like that?
In what sense?
Where you have to walk a tightrope with people so that they're not exposed? Probably not, since you're home most of the time.
Well, I apparently have, I don't know whether it's an aura or a facial expression or something that encourages strangers to tell me things, which is great for my podcast, right? That works out beautifully. But it's a little weird. I mean, I remember being about 21 years old. I had just moved to Boston, which is where I went for grad school. And one of my superpowers, randomly, is that I win radio contests.
Oh.
I am routinely, caller number 14 or whatever. And when I say routine, I've won probably 25 or 30.
Oh, wow.
So I was at a concert, because otherwise, as a grad student, I couldn't afford to go to any concerts at all. But I was at a concert in Boston, and, the opening act had just done their thing. And so I went to use the bathroom and I'm standing at the sink. I'm washing my hands and then I'm going to go out and watch the main act. I'm not making eye contact with anybody. I'm not interacting with anybody. I'm literally just washing my hands. And the woman at the next sink turns to me and goes, I'm going to do it. I'm going to divorce my husband. And I'm like, I literally looked around like, you're talking to me. Okay. I was like, good luck. Like, I don't know. What do you say? Something like that, you know?
I know.
And now I look back and I'm like, oh, cute little 21-year-old Kate, you had no idea that this was going to become your life, because it happens still on the regular. And now with everybody wearing masks, it's an extra adventure because I'm hard of hearing. And so I rely on lip reading. And if you're wearing a mask, I can't hear you. And so I don't know whether you're telling me, what my change is, or asking me for my date of birth at the pharmacy, or whether you just told me that you're pregnant. Like, I don't know what you're doing. And so I do a lot of hoping that I haven't just misunderstood the context of our relationship, because I'm just trying to pick up my prescriptions and go home,
Right. Yeah. I kind of understand what you're saying, because that's happened to me several times. Like, some guy came and sat one time. I was on the bus going or coming from school or work or something. And he just sat down and started talking to me and needed help. And that happens a lot to me too. Although nowadays I'm home most of the time and don't go out into societies. So,
but it's an odd thing though, because I do, I have the skill. I went on after I left the prison job. I went on to do crisis work, which is when you work. Usually people think of the emergency room, although I also worked in private homes and offices, and wherever I was called to go, I would go on ride-alongs or go to police stations or whatever. But whenever someone has suicidal or homicidal ideation, or a psychotic or bipolar episode, or in some states, substance abuse concerns, depends on that particular part depends very much on where you are. But as a crisis clinician, I had to do a fairly rapid assessment. I had an hour or two to figure out, like, what do we do now? Yeah. Is this person safe to go home? Right. If they are not safe to go home, where do they go? And that's a skill that I have a very hard time turning off. And I wouldn't feel right. I wouldn't be me, I think, if I did turn that all the way off. So when people do start to share now with me, I feel it's not an ethical obligation. It's just like an obligation to humanity to make sure they're safe.
Yes. Right.
Which is just asking, like literally just saying, are you safe? Are you okay? And if they say no, then I call for help and hand it over. Like, I don't take over there, but there's a case where having this, I think, just a tendency toward openness, and it's difficult to, one of my favorite professors in grad school referred to it as, it's difficult to shake my tree. It's difficult to say something to me that's going to leave me rattled and upset.
Yeah.
Which works out great if you're going to work in a prison. And I think I communicate that in certain ways.
Oh, yeah. It's interesting how people can maybe feel other people's energy, or I don't know, it's an instinct that they have of the ones that the people that are safe to go talk to and those who aren't. I mean, I think we have those instincts. All of us have those. We don't always acknowledge or pay attention to them, but.
Well, and there, through working with people who were suicidal, and as well, there are some amazing documentaries out there. There's one specifically that came out in the 1990s, approximately. I can't remember what year, but it's called The Bridge, and it's about the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, which is one of the, globally most common places that people go to die by suicide or attempt it. And the documentarians set up a camera just pointing at the bridge every day for a full year. Wow. And So they observed several people who either attempted or completed suicide. And then they were able to interview people because sometimes people go more than once before they literally take the jump. And they would interview them about what helped you step back from it. And all of this is, I watched this before I became a crisis clinician, but I was able to sort of confirm it in a way. I was able to compare my reality with this documentary later when I had this job of asking people like, so what made you ask for help or pick up the phone or let someone know that you were attempting or thinking of suicide rather than acting on it? Because I think it's really important that we figure out how can we reach anybody.
Right.
Because some that hopelessness and that misery sometimes does get enough better that they can keep breathing. They just need to know how to get to that next breath. And very often the answer is someone asked me if I was okay.
Oh, wow.
And that's all it took, is that I live alone and I function alone and I work in a nameless, faceless job or in customer service where people yell at me all the time or something. And I just feel unimportant and I feel invisible. And for someone to turn and notice me as a human and then to notice that I was upset and that something didn't seem right, and then to bother saying, "Are you okay?" That's all it took for me to say, "Yeah, I'm okay. Thank you."
Wow. The solution sometimes is so simple.
And it doesn't solve all of the problems, but it's a start. And I think we get so sucked into mind our own business and don't talk to strangers.
Right.
And yeah, no, don't mind your own business and talk to strangers because it's all we got sometimes.
Right. Yeah. Well, the don't talk to strangers is this whole idea that everyone else is dangerous to us. And that's not true.
It's not remotely true. Stranger danger is entirely made up. It's entirely false. It's a story we tell our children because we don't like the truth. Because the truth is, who's going to hurt a child? It's not going to be a stranger. Like, stranger crime does happen, but it's incredibly rare. The people that hurt children are close family members, teachers, doctors, coaches, religious leaders, that kind of thing. People who are trusted alone with children, who get the opportunity to sort of build up trust and start to build the walls around the child that allow the adult to behave how they want to behave.
Yeah.
So talk to strangers, also talk to your parents. That's what kids need to hear.
Yeah. And parents need to be the kind of parents that their children can talk to them.
Yeah.
I do not remember who said this, but I was talking to another teacher, I think. This was several years ago. And she was saying it's very, very sad that a lot of times I'm talking to my students and asking them, or it'll be an assignment maybe, when do you and your family sit together at the table and have dinner? Or what are your family celebrations like? Or something like that. And she said it was amazing to her how many of her students, and she was an elementary school teacher. So this was really doubly sad. Children would say, "Oh, I come home from school and I go up into my room and I play video games or I do my homework or I watch something on my computer. And, I get to go down and get dinner and take it back up to my room. And then I go to bed." It's like there's no or very little interaction among family members. Everybody's isolated in their own little room. And she said, I was appalled at how many students said that.
It's a funny line to walk because I also don't want to be my kid's cruise director.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
And I don't want to overschedule them or over entertain them. Like, I want them to be able to read a book or do a craft on their own or play with a toy or whatever. And so there is a certain degree, especially as they get older, of, making myself obsolete. Like, that's the goal. But that being said, my kids, even, my oldest is 21 and my other kids are 17, 11, and 9. So they're all, no babies anymore.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And still, all 4 of them get not necessarily matching, but at least corresponding pajamas every year for Christmas Eve. And they all know that they're going to put them on and they're going to get a picture taken. And they can kick back, but they're going to lose that fight. So they might as well just put them on, take the picture, and I'll leave them alone sooner. And that's how it worked. And it was tough during pandemic because you need both the connection with the kids and the space.
Right. Oh, yeah. I don't have children, so I can't really imagine what it would be like to be all together, everybody all together 24/7. And, but you can have that planned together time and planned separation time. My youngest sister does that with her kids. And, my oldest or her oldest is 19 now, going to the University of Washington, but she still lives at home. And, she's studying during the day or she's at class, and everybody's off at work or class or school. But when they come back together, they have dinner together and maybe they'll watch a movie together or they'll watch a television show together. They'll have some family time in the evening, whatever it is. And then, of course, on holidays, they have family time, but they also have times when they're all, I need some alone time today because today was really hard. And so, they might go off into their room. The 2 children might go off into their rooms and have some alone time. It doesn't have to be 24/7 that you're with your kids, I don't think.
Right. It's a balance. It's a balance of especially with 2 of mine being in or late adolescence.
Mm-hmm.
They were both, my 21-year-old still lives at home. She's in her senior year of college herself.
Mm-hmm.
And my 17-year-old is a senior in high school. And so with both of them, like by the time I was 17, I didn't live at home anymore. By the time I was 22, I had my first child. So, there has to be a degree of allowing autonomy and allowing alone time and allowing space. Mm-hmm. But there's also the expectation that we balance that with being polite and contributing to household chores and, coming together for dinners at least once in a while. Like it's not an everyday thing now, but once a week now, I started it with my older kids and now my oldest now works in a cafe. And so I continued the process of once a week, we learn a meal. We learn how to cook.
Oh, that's cool.
Not from a box or from a can. That's fine. They can do that the other 6 nights a week. As far as I'm concerned, that's fine. But one day a week, we're going to learn how to cook something that requires actual organic ingredients.
And cutting. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and preferably not your own fingers. Yes, exactly. All of that.
And assembling. Yeah.
And they, they are more adventuresome in trying foods when they've cooked them.
Yes.
Than if it's just served to them. Yeah. And they're so proud of themselves to know how to do this. Yeah. And like I said, my oldest was able to go on and get a job at a cafe as a cook based solely on skills that she had learned at home.
Oh, wow. That's so cool. Yeah, that is really cool. I love it. I had to cook because, and I remember when I was 6 years old, my mom would get a chair and she'd stand me in front of the sink and I'd wash dishes after dinner. Mm-hmm. My brother was supposed to help. Most of the time he would irritate me so bad that I would tell him to get out of there. And my mom said, don't you know that's a strategy? He's doing that so he doesn't have to. Well, and and now looking back, I would say, well, Mom, you could give him a night to do dishes and you can give me a night to do dishes so that he has to do the dishes. And so, when she was working when I was in high school again, she worked when I was young and then had my two younger sisters. And so for a while she was home, not working. But when she went back to work again, I had to cook the meals. So I had to learn how to cook. And my dad was so gracious because at first I didn't cook enough. I didn't know proportions. How do you make the right proportions for six people? And and my dad would just go and make himself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And when I realized that he was doing that, I thought, oh, I guess I need to figure out
Right.
how to make
Right.
meals to love.
See, I'm kind of I say I'm a mean mom, and so we have a rule in my house that I'm quite proud of, and that is that all four of them, anyone who lives in the house, you have to do 3 chores every day if you would like to sleep inside.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
none of them have ever pushed me on that. Like, I think they know that we do own a tent, and I absolutely would at least set it up and scare them with it. I don't know whether I live in New England. Like, it gets pretty cold out here in January. So I don't think they want to brinksmanship with me.
Right.
If your mother has worked at a prison, you already know. And so they all know. They from very young, it's simple as helping to empty the dishwasher, and by the time my oldest two are in maybe sophomore or junior year of high school, they can run the house sort of on their own, which is helpful because if your mother, for instance, goes and breaks her back, now you got to step up.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah, because I think this is how it was kind of for my mom. Although Dad did cook, he was actually a better cook than my mom because he had to teach her how to cook. Her mom didn't teach her how to cook. But, we all had to do chores too. And I remember Saturdays when we lived south of Spokane. We lived a lot of different places, but when we lived south of Spokane, there was no washer and dryer hookup in the house that my mom and dad bought. And so we had to drive into Spokane 12 miles to do the laundry. And my brother and I would make a game out of making baskets with the socks into the washing machine,
Sure.
stuff like that. And we'd go grocery shopping with her and help her with that. And we'd clean house on Saturday mornings, vacuuming and dusting and, that kind of stuff. So we all pitched in. Everybody pitched in because mom and dad were both working. Both of them were working. Dad was the one who took care of all the cars, anything that was quote unquote man stuff. But he did cook on the weekends. So yeah, we all did it. And I think that people who don't have parents who teach them how to clean house and cook and do laundry, they're at such a disadvantage when they are out on their own.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even before that, I remember, one of my close friends her oldest daughter is within a few weeks of my oldest child.
Oh, uh-huh.
That's how we became close friends. But myself and my friend are about a generation apart, where she's, I think, 17 years older than I am.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of different mindsets on how to do things. And I think my friend I know runs anxious, and she wants to do things for the kids, and she wants it done right. And let's be real, it's easier to just do it than to wait and find that patience to let the kids screw it up. It's just, and it's difficult. There are times where you're looking at them and you're like, oh, that's salt, not sugar. Oh boy. Okay. Well, we're doing science today. That's what we're doing, and I don't tend to run anxious. And so I was able to sort of, all right, make your mistake. That's how you're going to learn. And my friend had a very, very difficult time with that. And so when our girls were about 4 or so, she had a second child before I had my second child. And so I had both of her kids up to my house for a weekend so that they could have a break.
Mm-hmm.
And it was chilly outside. And so we were like, let's get the kids outside, go run around, go move, let's go somewhere, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And my kids, my daughter knew to go and get your shoes and get your coat and put them on and blah, blah, blah. And her kids both went and stood next to their coats and shoes and stood there.
Oh.
And it wasn't in a like snotty way.
Right.
It was in a like, I don't know what to do. And so I have a photo of it somewhere of my 4-year-old putting her 4-year-old's coat on for her.
Oh, her friend's coat on for her. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
buttoning and zipping her friend's coat because her friend didn't know how to do that.
Oh, wow. Well, and I think my mom's mom was sort of that same way. She did all the housework. She did all the, she did everything and it was, maybe she wasn't anxiety ridden, but it was just easier. Like you said, it was just easier. Not to
yeah, there's a lot of reasons I think that parents sort of, sometimes it's just as simple as that's how we're taught,
right?
And
yeah,
all of that's fine. It's just I tend to be more about figure it out, kiddo.
Right.
Come to me with questions. I'm not going to tell you how to do it until we've proven that you're having a rough time, and then we'll figure it out together.
Right.
And that's just sort of my style. And that creates kids who are pretty functional.
And problem solvers. Yeah. I remember when I was little and I was 6 and my mom showed me the procedure for how to clean the kitchen. So it was like, this is the procedure. And then I would do the dishes, and then she would, periodically she would check up on me and, oh, remember you need to clean off the stove. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. As I was growing up. So she did that because she didn't know anything when she got married, and she was 18 when she got married. And Dad had to teach her how to cook and clean the house and, all that. And she felt a little embarrassed by that. And so she wanted to make sure that we all knew how to do all of that, even my brother.
Well, and I mean, if you loop all of that around sort of to this concept of story,
mm-hmm.
and the stories, I think, psychology is basically another word for what are the stories we tell ourselves,
right,
either about other people or about ourselves.
Right.
And if a kid feels like they can probably figure something out,
mm-hmm.
that's a way of them telling themselves a story about, I can figure things out, I can be a problem solver, as opposed to a kid being told a procedure. Then you get a kid who tells themselves, I can learn a procedure.
Mm-hmm.
And between those two, I'd rather the kid be more flexible.
Right. Well, and also the kid that the mom does everything for them, they think they're not capable of it. Maybe.
Well, they could, and then that's another thing. Is how do you know?
Yeah.
How do you know? And that's I look at childhood as being this tiny little slice of time when it's best. It's not only okay to screw up, but it's best to do so, because now is when you have hopefully benevolent people that will walk you through the process of fixing any mistakes that you make, or coping, tolerating with difficult emotions, and coping with loss, or coping with failure, or whatever the case may be.
Right.
Now's your chance. I look at the sort of the mommies who get very protective of their kids, and everybody gets a trophy and that sort of thing. And I'm like, I feel like you're doing them such a disservice, because you're telling them that everybody's the same and everybody's equal and nobody's special, therefore, and that they don't have a functioning brain effectively. Like, that's not a message I want to tell my kids. I want my kids to tell their own story that includes a sense of agency.
And experiencing loss or disappointment or whatever it is, you need those when you're younger to help you when you're older.
Yeah, it's not like I want my kids to experience grief or the like, but it's going to happen anyway.
Right,
So
yeah.
at the very least, learn how to deal with the loss of a pet or the ending of a friendship, or, reimagining what grief means, and realizing that, a lot of times we when we hear grief, we think death. And yes, but also you can grieve the loss of a plan or the loss of a dream. You can grieve the loss of a plant. You can grieve the loss of a toy. You can grieve the experience of reaching the end of a book.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And knowing there's no more to the story, and all of those are different losses that we experience.
Right. Yeah.
And it's okay.
Yeah.
That's part and parcel of life, and acknowledging those to the kids and letting kids work through that. And my husband and I have our own ways of processing through things, and other family members do. And we kind of give them different role models and let the kids kind of figure it out.
Yeah. Oh, that's so great. I love it. Yeah. I like your philosophy that psychology is all about the stories we tell ourselves and we tell about each other. Because I always felt I did take philosophy as part of my whole theater experience, because, you gotta figure out why people do what they do. And I guess that's why I wanted to take some psychology classes, because I thought, well, maybe, I'll get a little clue about how people's brains work and that kind of thing from when I was actively acting. But I think, a lot of us need to consider that sometimes we tell ourselves stories that aren't true. We tell ourselves stories about other people that aren't true. And that's all part of psychology also, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of us imagine that we are somehow imbued with like a divining rod for truth in our brains.
Right.
And I can tell you right now, like I'm literally a forensic psychologist. I have literally sat on the witness stand and testified as to, the veracity of a given client's claims, for instance, or inmates' claims or whatever. And I was always very clear about, I think they were telling the truth, or they were consistent with truth telling, but I don't know. Nobody really knows. Like I occasionally kind of get a vibe if someone is maybe not telling the truth. Like there's a difference to the flow, but at the same time, sometimes that's just because they have difficulty with words or difficulty with auditory processing, or they're thinking very carefully to try to be very precise. So pauses and stuttering and talking with their hands, like that's just me. That's how I function in the world. That could be interpreted as lying, or like I said, I have I am neurodivergent and I struggle with words, and so on. And so it's like, I kind of get a vague sense, and I will say that, I would say that when I would be on the witness stand, like, I had a sense that they were not being fully truthful, but that's all I got.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know what the truth is.
Right.
And I don't even know which part was or wasn't true in what they said. I just got a vibe, and that like me and lawyers hate that, but that's real. Like there's, unless you got a camera on it, we don't know.
Right. Yeah. Wow, this has been so interesting. So, do you have anything you want to say about your podcast, or maybe any stories that you're consuming that you want to tell our listeners about before we go?
I mean, sure. My podcast, I'm up to 380 episodes at time of recording. So by May, it'll probably be, 6,000, give or take. I release 2 to 3 episodes a week when I'm able to, when I'm physically healthy enough to do so. Yeah. Because that's the only way I can stay caught up with myself in terms of recording. Right. If I want to talk to more than one person a week, I have to drop more than one episode a week. Right. And I do. So, It's meant to be consumed so that each episode is standalone.
Oh, yeah.
So episodic rather than serial in nature.
Uh-huh.
So people can dip in and dip out. If they
Mhm.
want to hear crime stories, they're there. If they don't want to hear anything crime, there's still several hundred episodes that they can listen to. You know, it's really a mishmash of topics and concepts, and that's the best to me. And I never know which episodes are going to get feedback, and that's really all I care about. Like, I don't care about download numbers. I don't care about, you know, charting and things like that, because
Ratings
that's
and-
out of ratings and reviews mean absolutely nothing. And I mean, it's been proven that Apple, I've spoken with execs at Apple who have said, like, don't bother asking for ratings and reviews because they don't impact your placement on the charts. And I'm like, cool, because I hate that. And, you know, all of those things, numbers of downloads, numbers of subscribers, those are metrics. And that's nice to have numbers. Like, people like that. But I don't have any control over that.
Right.
All I have control over is putting together an interesting conversation and presenting each guest in the best light that I'm able to present them
Yes.
in.
Yes.
So sometimes, like, I've had some celebrities, you know, people that are, depending on your household, potentially a household name.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that means that episode will get more attention. Other times I've had people come on who are listeners who bring an audience of 0 along with them.
Mm-hmm.
And like one particular guest was that case exactly, of he didn't have any sort of show or book or whatever. He had a small business that he was just starting to get off the ground, and I thought that's kind of what we were going to maybe talk about. Wasn't really sure, but I'll talk to almost anybody. So sure, you want to come on my show? Why not? Let's play. Let's see what happens. And a few minutes in, he told me about his experience of being in his 30s and being diagnosed with autism.
Oh.
And how he'd never had this explained to him before, and suddenly things made sense to him. And for him, it was a very positive and powerful experience.
Wow, yeah.
You know, to understand himself better. And that episode, I've gotten more direct messages and emails and feedback about that episode from people saying, I understand my child better. I'm going to call my doctor tomorrow. I think maybe I have autism. Where should I start?
Oh, wow.
And it's amazing. Like, I would have done all of the work I've done for all 380 episodes just for that one episode.
Yes.
You know, and so that's what I'm saying. It just sort of comes and goes, and you can pick and choose whether you are interested or not.
Right. You know, I'm with you. I don't pay attention to how many downloads I have. I don't think I've ever had anybody make a comment on my show notes, but I have had lots of people like the episode and start following me because of episodes. I don't know. It's just fun.
Yeah, and that's exactly when I started podcasting initially. I made it a couple of hard and fast rules for myself, because podcasting doesn't have rules. And so my rules for myself was, one, that I was not going to have a release day. I initially said that because I don't cope real well with deadlines. You know, I had a lot of deadlines when I was working, and so I didn't want to do that anymore. And then very early on, like somewhere in the first 10 episodes, was when I started to do some collaboration with other podcasters. And they were very clear that they were going to release half of their story and I was going to release the other half. And we wanted to publish those episodes at the same time. And they were like, we publish Wednesdays at midnight. And I was like, okay. And that was not smart on my part, because it was the first sort of editing intensive episode that I did, and I really pushed myself, and I missed sleep, and I ended up giving myself a seizure.
Oh, no.
And I was like, this is not ideal, you know, and that really just reinforced, like, I will try, And I say that to guests that, if you have a book coming out or a season starting or something, I will try to aim for your date, but I never make a hard and fast promise about it because you just never know. And because then that takes some of the fun out of it. Like this evening, about 5 o'clock, I was like, okay, I'm recording at 8. I'm going to go throw out an episode right now. Kids are fine. Kids are with their dad right now, because he's my husband is a college professor. And so he's home. He's got them. He'll keep them alive, presumably. Not my problem. And so I'm going to go through out an episode right now. And that makes it fun and exciting to do. So I told myself, I'm not going to have a set day of the week release day. And, I'm going to just focus on this is, even if I start making money, which I now do, still, it's meant for me in my head to be more fun than stress.
Well, I have enjoyed talking to you both times when I was on your show and now having you on my show, Kate. I'm just
absolutely.
I hope your podcast is very successful.
I'm coming up to. Probably by the time this episode airs, I'm going to say a sentence, and I understand each individual word in the sentence, but when I put it together, my brain explodes a little bit. By the time this comes out on your feed, I will probably have passed 1 million downloads.
Wow, great.
That's insane. Especially because I'm not a true crime show.
Right. Yeah.
True crime shows the ones that get the big numbers, and I get it. That's what's popular right now. That's fine. But so that's Ignorance Was Bliss. It's I don't do seasons. I just kind of ongoing. That's my main show. I am working on a second show, which I'm going to plug now because it won't have started by May, but it's the trailer's out. We have an RSS feed. We've started the process. I have a co-host. His name is Jacob, and we are doing a true crime narrative. He was kind of combing through some newspaper clippings from 1977 in rural Washington. Carnation, Washington.
Oh.
And he found this little tiny squib about a murder that happened. And he was like, why are there not movies made about this? Why hasn't everybody heard about this? This is horrifying. And it's a story that hasn't, we've done the searches. No one has talked about it. No one has written about it. No one has covered it in a podcast, not even a single episode. And we felt like the victim deserves to be remembered. And so Jacob submitted the Freedom of Information Act, the FOIA request, and it was approved. So we have all of the original police reports and court documents for it. So we're going to do a serial, so you'll need to start from the beginning and work your way through. And it's called The Same River Twice, because there's the Greek philosopher Heraclitus has a saying that says, no man ever stands in the same river twice, for it is not the same river and he is not the same man.
Yeah.
And that's very much what this is about, is that this one event changed everyone around it in its different ways. And so that'll be coming out later this year.
Wow, that's great. Well, that sounds fascinating. So, okay, that's good.
It's been the best thing. I was looking to start podcasting because I felt lost a little bit in the chaos of my own life. And I felt like I was sort of relegating myself to a supportive role in my own life instead of literally using my voice. And using these skills that I've developed and this knowledge that's just kind of flopping around inside my brain, let's use some of that.
Yeah.
And that's what I thought. I thought I'd do 10 or 20 episodes of me sort of lecture style, scripted and very focused on this topic. And then I'd move on to some other hobby of some sort. I don't know. And instead it has blossomed, and I've made very close friends. And I've presented live, I've had live shows, and I've traveled all over the country for, conferences and the like. And just, it has reopened my world in ways both physical and metaphysical. in a very important way for me.
Yeah. Oh, good. Oh, man, that's so great. Well, that's encouraging for me. Well, Kate, thank you so much for having another conversation with me. I enjoyed it both times.
Oh, absolutely. And you're welcome to come play whenever you'd like. You know,
Okay,
if you have
sounds great.
a project or something, or just looking to kill some time, you know, let me know and we'll come up with something.
Okay, great. Yeah, sounds great.
Before I go, I'd like to give a big shout out to Podmatch, which I call a dating service for podcasters. Since I joined their platform, I have met so many wonderful people from all over the world, and they make the matches so easy that if you are a podcaster or you have a message that you want to share, you might want to consider checking them out. The affiliate link is at the bottom of my show notes on my website at sagewomanchronicles@sagewoman.life. Part of what I love about them is that they promote civil conversations, and can't we use that right now? So if you check them out, tell them Lucinda sent you. I'd also like to invite you to my Patreon community, where we will have chats with authors or creators. We'll have member chats about the stories that they love, and occasionally we'll have extra episodes or uncut episodes of Story Power. So please go check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/storypower without the hyphen, all one word. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you like what you heard, please share it with a friend and give us a review on your favorite podcast app. It will help people find us. And remember, as Philip Pullman said, after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the thing we need most in the world. Until next time, this is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden. Thanks for listening.